Good evening and welcome to GI Film Festival 2021. I'm Maya Trabulsi, news anchor and reporter for KPBS Evening Edition. And on behalf of KPBS, our festival organizers, volunteers, and filmmakers, we would like to say thank you for joining us for the viewing of these two important films, United We Heal and Budding Creativity. With us this evening is the director of Budding Creativity, Kay Barnes. Also with us is Ryan Welch, director and producer of United We Heal, and co-director Ryan Rossman. And joining them from the film is someone you'll recognize as a subject of the film, Magnus Johnson, who was also executive producer on the film. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Megan Hawker, clinical director of Interfaith Community Services, and Dean Dauphinais, veteran advocate and CEO of All Star Vets. Thank you all for being here. Kay, I'd like to start with you if that's okay. As a military veteran, a military spouse, a mom of three, and a trauma nurse, you have an extraordinarily unique lens from which you draw upon for your filmmaking. What did it mean to you that this film was chosen?
Well, for me, it really meant the world to me. I'm very used to people highlighting the negativity behind veterans and the issues that veterans have, and none of the positive and the growth that happens with veterans. So this meant a lot to me, just from that perspective, but also to have a film chosen being a female and a veteran. It was just so empowering for me.
And when we talked earlier, you mentioned how art like this has been a critical part of the way that you've managed to express yourself. Planting a garden, growing food, I imagine that nurtures your spirit in many ways. Tell us more about that too.
Yeah, so during COVID and the shutdown and everything and having to be in a state of isolation, I really didn't feel like I could create anything or that I was putting anything good or any good energy out into the world. And discovering this inner creativity that I had within myself with this gardening and being able to create this thing really just fulfilled me in a new way that I didn't realize that I was missing during COVID. I mean, we all knew that we didn't want to be in isolation, but this really just helped to grow me from a really inner place.
And you talk about how it's been an avenue for you to connect with other people and kind of grow your community as well. What has that meant for you?
Oh gosh, everything really, just because I'm such a social person before COVID, and really a big extrovert, and having to go into this isolation, this forced isolation in inward thought, and then being able to discover this, gardening and creativity and connect with my neighbors and bond with my neighbors, it really started the progress towards opening us back up to each other safely, of course, at the time, but we would talk to each other. And being a spouse can be isolating in itself, and you really need that community to bond with or whatnot because they really understand you. So it was a really great experience for both me and my neighbors and my community as a whole, really.
And I want to remind all of our viewers right now that they can send questions. This is really a two-way discussion. If you have any questions for any of the filmmakers or any of of Dr. Hawker or anybody else, please send them through and we'll try to get to them. I'd like to move on to Ryan Rosman and Ryan Welch. When we talked earlier, you guys mentioned to me that this film came about it was almost serendipitous. It was an opportunity that actually seemed to have found you. Talk to us about the journey that this film went through from the beginning.
Yeah, like a few, in early 2012, 2013, we met a veteran who, we happened to be at a dinner with, and he had lost his leg in Iraq, and we listened to his story, and both Ryan and I were just, we were just compelled by what he was saying and his journey. And we didn't know what it was at the time, but we knew at some point we needed to tell his story. We didn't know what avenue it would take or where it would go, but we just kind of put it in our back pocket and ended up going down to Arizona a few years later, actually 6 to 8 months later, and just captured a little bit of his story to the start. And we just knew at some point we wanted to get that out there. And that was kind of the beginning of it. So once we connected with Magnus, heard more of his story, everything just kind of came together. He had a vision. Him and Jeff Kyle had a foresight to say, hey, we want to get this out there in some way. And Ryan and I said, okay, let's figure out how to compile some of these stories that we've already got and then go out and get a few more to kind of put together this doc.
But I guess that's kind of a great message also to other filmmakers, budding filmmakers who might think that you have to have it all planned out, but really without a plan, sometimes it works out better.
Yeah. I think that this movie really came together, built from one opportunity that we had, and then it presented another opportunity and another opportunity. And you just sort of keep on chasing it. And a lot of times we would film something when we had the chance, and we would just put it in our back pocket, and it would never even be edited or put together until we finally realized, like, okay, like it's all coming together. And even meeting Magnus we were at an event totally unrelated to him. We didn't know him, and he had heard of what we were doing, and then he walked up to us with a clipboard and all these ideas, and then it was like, okay, well, now we're gonna fly to Indiana to see Magnus next week. So it's just exciting that it's gotten to where it is from 2014.
And in the movie, you address the military-civilian divide and how keeping military stories solely within that group further widens that divide. Is that part of the reason that you wanted to bring this to a wider audience?
Yeah, I mean, Ryan and I, neither of us are veterans. We're storytellers to begin with, and we've sort of been thrown into the veteran world through a couple of clients that kind of led us down that path. And the more and more we would meet these veterans and hear their stories, and we'd come back to Oregon, and we'd say, we would want to just tell our friends and say, hey, this is what's going out, especially here in the Northwest. We're a little isolated here in terms of veterans and veteran and knowledge of veterans. And so we would come back and say, the gap needs to, shrink here. Like the distance between civilians and veterans needs to get shorter. And so I think for us, initially it was just we'd sit around a fire with our friends and tell these stories. And then we're like, hey, we can do this at a larger scale. We have the ability with our filmmaking, skills to be able to get this out to the world and hopefully, shorten that gap between civilians and veterans.
Magnus, I'm going to give you an opportunity to answer that too. I'm sure that you have your own perspective on this about the military-civilian divide and how important it is to share these stories. And in fact, you were mentioning something in the film about how when stories are shared, that burden is shared as well, and it alleviates that. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think less than 1% of the nation is involved in the military in any capacity, and then the people involved in the military, how much of them bear the burden of combat. And so what happens when you have a small section or a group of people that go to war or are engaged in combat in the nation's name, what you do is you get a different class, a different group. And then society moves on, topics move on, issues move on. But for those individuals, that burden, that weight remains. And so they carry the burden of fighting it. And I think as a community and as a nation, we can help hear the stories, and then that lightens the burden of the individuals carrying it. And then we can all take a little piece and disperse that kind of that experience and that energy. What that does is it creates meaning and purpose, and it creates connection for those that were served and those who did serve. And then that can help create closure and a new beginning. And that can be done at a local level. That could be done, in a neighborhood, in a school, as we're doing now. And it creates community, and it lightens the burden for the veterans, and it also gives awareness and perspective for the civilians. And so that creates meaning for everyone.
You are an 8-year Army veteran and former Green Beret. One of the most poignant messages that you conveyed through this film that really resonated with me as a viewer was when you talked about the lifespan of a veteran and how these 2 or 3 years are so powerful, and they could be such traumatic experiences that they overshadow the rest of your life. But your message was about growth and how you grow, yet the experience still stays that size. That was really something that resonated. Talk to us about that and how your identity changes with growth.
Well, for me, you have all these experiences, you do all these things, and then time goes by and you realize it's over. The war's over, I'm home. And the intensity of it, in my perspective, it's like squeezing 10 years into one. Or, the effect on your body, the effect on your psyche, the effect on a physiological level, I think it accelerates age. Really interesting thing is to look at pictures of people before and after their combat tours. And if you can find people and you can look at their pictures as the tours go on, they age drastically. And so you can't deny it, you can't resist it, you can't ignore it, but you can decide to accept it. You can decide to take inventory of who you are, what you have, what you could be, where you've been, and what that means. And I think is when you begin to transmute it and that not about yourself, but begin to give others and begin to help share the story and find purpose and have meaning that you can share with others, it begins to take those moments of despair, to take those dark nights of the soul and reconfigure them as energy to begin to reach out to others as a spark, as a catalyst, as instead of the pit of your soul, it can become the spark of desire as a place to connect with, because it's what you have in common. When you go through trauma, then now you have an opportunity to have connection and empathy with other people who have gone through trauma. And then you start to realize everyone has some sort of trauma. And then your world just starts opening up, and then you see how much of how you can connect. And so what you thought was blocking you from the sunlight is actually inviting you into it. And it's a matter of perspective. It takes a lot of work. Some people there's many different paths to do that, but I think of it as the hero's journey. It's a motif, a template, through story and film, the hero's journey. You have the experiences, you go through them, and then when you come out the other side, if you're willing, you now have something to share with others, and that's experience and hope and wisdom.
And Dr. Hawker, you've done a lot of work with post-traumatic growth. Obviously, trauma affects individuals in different ways, with the initial signs initially that manifest also in different ways. What is your advice to individuals who are struggling post-service?
So I think one important distinction is that post-traumatic growth is not the opposite of post-traumatic stress, and that individuals who are on their pathway to growth are oftentimes going to go through some of those challenges and the transitions. They might be experiencing some of those symptoms, the intrusive memories, the flashbacks, the hypervigilance. And so I think Magnus said it incredibly well, and it's connecting out to others. One of the things that research has shown is that one incredibly important factor is not just the disclosure, but the reception of the disclosure. So being able to connect with other individuals who you're able to share your story with is important, but also understanding that it's not always a nice, easy path. It's not always easy. It's not just rainbows and puppy dogs, and all of a sudden you're in a place of growth. It's a process of finding meaning through the trauma and the tragedy. And that's not always an easy process, but it's much easier when you're doing it with a support system, with individuals you can trust, whether that's other veterans, whether it's family and friends, and trying not to go at it alone.
Dean, let me ask you this. What can you tell us from your perspective are some of the myths that you believe need to be addressed and understood?
That we're damaged goods, veterans are damaged goods. That's one of the biggest ones. And I always say that we've kind of been beating that dead horse of the PTSD, and you keep hearing it. Eventually it comes that self-fulfilling prophecy almost, where I've seen it where some of our veterans get that diagnosis and then they start living out that life of, a disabled person, which really robs them of living a fulfilled life. So I think changing the narrative, and I feel like post-traumatic growth is that thing to interject into this discussion about these topics of trauma and how to deal with them. So that's what we try to do with post-traumatic growth. We're trying to interject that into that discussion and say, let's change this discussion to actually, give those veterans that hope that they need to get through this trauma. That hope, you keep hearing that theme throughout the film as well. And that's what it is. They need something to be striving for. I know Ben was such a motivator in the film, and he's talking about how he needed new goals, right? We all need those new goals. We need something to be striving for, and it's inherent in us. If we're veterans, it's in us. We just gotta, maybe you forgot it, maybe the trauma has suppressed it and things, but it's in there. You just gotta, like Dr. Hocker saying, if you have support systems, they can help you realize that it's in there, and then you can pull it out and, really live out that warrior life that's in all of us that have served.
Well, let's talk about the attitude of growth. How can the attitude of growth impact that the veteran? I'm going to ask you first, Dean, and then I'd like to ask Kay as well.
Well, it is a mindset. It is a mindset thing, and it's easier said than done, though, because it's hard to say. There's no one size fits all for this. Every veteran has gone through their own unique lived experience with it. But if you can get them to think in the terms of growth, and not allow that trauma to kind of be that defining thing in their life, that they're a sticking point where they don't overcome it, and it's a thing that holds them down from living a fulfilled life. I really feel like if we can get them to start just looking at things a little bit differently, because I feel a lot of what they hear, what our veterans hear, are based around kind of negative concepts and things about trauma. So I think helping films like this, showing them, nothing more powerful than these stories right here to show people that have gone through it. And I like the variety of how they showed the things in the film. So the pill addiction thing and the pills, that's a huge thing in our veteran community. So I was really glad that you highlighted that piece of it to show that, because coming out of that alone is a big struggle. And so yeah, I feel like things like we're doing right here and the film itself are the types of things that can show people that there's hope out there.
Kay, would you like an opportunity to answer that about how the attitude of growth can impact a veteran positively?
Yeah, definitely. For me personally, when I first got into our duty station that we're at now, I had just gotten transitioned out of the military. I had been through a bit of trauma in the military and was kind of like hoping to go into a glass half full and try like a new start. And then COVID happened. And so when I was getting ready, just in the midst of creating and branching out in the film industry, and COVID happened, and I just really started to really get in this cloud and darkness of, like I said, I can't create anything. I can't reach out to people. I can't do a lot, counselors were shut down and, until they figured out the whole, they could do it virtually thing, and communities were pulled apart. And so for me, starting to create this garden gave me the creativity that I was missing to create something new. It gave me a sense of control over something in this, whirlwind of things that suddenly I had no control over. I can't go anywhere. I can't do anything. I can't see anyone. I can't create anything. Woe is me. And it really opened me up to the fact that I could put something out good into the world, and that there was new life out there, and there was something that I create and could, really direct the narrative of it. And control that growth within myself and that growth around me. So literally and figuratively. So it was good.
I only have a couple of more minutes, but I would like to ask this question from one of our viewers. Dr. Hocker, that you might be the right person to answer this. Our viewer wants to know how he teaches guitar to veterans, and he wants to know how music and art related programs can really help enhance the self-esteem and allow veterans to connect with each other and then grow from there.
That's a great question. Thank you. So one of the things that we see as really helpful for veterans is the type of coping mechanisms that they're engaging with. Or is it a positive coping mechanism such as art, emotional expression, music, theater? Those are all really helpful. It's the avoidant coping mechanisms, whether it's turning to drugs, alcohol, video games, that type of thing, can be really detrimental. And I think just, I've seen a lot of veterans that I've worked with they might struggle with the ability to explain what they're feeling emotionally, verbally, but they're able to do it in an outlet that's in an artistic fashion, whether that is drawing, painting, music, and so on. And so I think that regardless of how the veteran does it, being able to have that emotional outlet is incredibly important and part of the healing process.
Thank you. Magnus, I'd like to ask you for just some final thoughts.
Well, we have the power how the stories end. You know, we don't always have the power how the stories begin. You know, we didn't start the war. We didn't start COVID, this, that, and the other, but we have the power to take something that's happening now, honor it, breathe life into it, and mold and craft and shape how our stories end. And if we choose to do that on a consistent basis and be present, how stories end can be much better than how they began. And I think that power is within us as humans and as people, and that can create, that have the ability to create within them. And so I would say, even in the darkest times, you know, look for that within you, and it'll be there, and it'll drag you out. That's what I would say.
Thank you so very much. Thank you to all of you who contributed to this film festival, for all of your films. Congratulations. Really appreciate this discussion. It could go on for another few hours, I'm sure, but unfortunately, this is the end of our program, and it has really been extremely enlightening. But it doesn't end here. There are plenty of great films to catch throughout the festival, and we hope that you see as many films as your schedule possibly allows you to see. And you can find a full schedule of the films at gifilmfestivalsd.org. And now I'd like to say a big thank you to all involved for making this virtual festival possible, including our advisory committee members, the Film Consortium San Diego, our wonderful filmmakers, and our festival sponsors and partners, who are as follows: the California Arts Council, Scatina Daniels Communications, National University, Task and Purpose, and the San Diego International Airport Arts Program. And you should have received an email reminder for this screening that you're watching. And within that, there is a link to our attendee survey. It just takes a few minutes of your time, but your feedback is really important because it helps us make 2022 GI Film Festival San Diego better than ever. And with that, thank you again to all of our filmmakers. Thank you so much for joining us. Good night.